Greetings and good evening. We are in the 1010 class for meeting number 7, June the 11th. And we are briefly reviewing now the work of meeting number 8, June the 13th session. Just to review, your cover sheet should include Chapter 7 notes, Chapter 21 through 22 bullet point notes, also the Grammar Handbook Section R, and finally the Chapter 7 paper proposing a solution on page 363. The first thing I want to say about this is that this will be the first of the papers you're submitting to me where I will be fairly assiduous in my evaluation of your paper as following the MLA style book, and more particularly the model paper of 772 to 778. I'll go into more detail on that topic here in a moment, but I would put a note to myself that this is significant. So 5 pieces of external validation, properly attributed both in text as well as end text citation. So this is the first time really that I'm expecting that. I would hope that you do it in the packet that you'll hand in this evening of meeting 7. But I will be kind of lenient because we have not had the thorough conversation we're about to have. Let's look now on page 363 at this assignment called Proposing a Solution. And let me just say this out loud. Axelrod Cooper want to make sure that you understand how to write an academic essay. So let's just say it out loud. There is a tremendous amount of overkill in the 1010 offering. That is to say, you're going to write a paper that is an academic essay, then you're going to write another one, then you're going to write another one. And if you find yourself saying, these papers all seem to kind of be somewhat similar, the answer to that quickly is, you're right. You're absolutely right. These are very similar kinds of papers. However, with slight gradations of difference, and those slight gradations of difference have something to do with the different kinds of expectations within the academic community. In other words, yes, you will always write academic essays within, for example, the science department, the biology department, the science department, the physics department, the math department, of course the humanities department, history and literature and the like. But those kinds of papers will sometimes be just a little bit different, which is why Axelrod Cooper will be introducing you to different kinds of papers. In this case, the proposing of a solution you will often write when you're taking a course, for example, in sociology or even sometimes psychology, where, well, let's read it now together on 363. You're going to write an essay where you do propose a solution to a problem. You're going to choose a problem, and that's the first thing. I mean, if you're taking notes to get ready for this paper, that's job one. You have to articulate early on an identifiable problem. Read, in code language, an arguable thesis. That is to say, this problem has to be a legitimate problem, okay? In other words, it has alternate points of view in regards to the problem itself. Okay, that's what we mean by an arguable thesis. This problem faced by a community or a group to which you belong, and you're going to address your proposal to one or more members of the group or to outsiders who might help solve the problem. Your paper will therefore involve 3 things. 1, a statement of the problem directly, specifically. Okay, so early on, you want to articulate what really the problem is. 2, a series of purported solutions to the problem and/or a single solution to the problem that is comprised of multiple steps. 3, you're going to demonstrate proper research. That is to say, you will be citing at least 5 times in the course of your paper. Again, using the model on 772 to 778. As your example. Okay? The second packet that you will hand in on Thursday, and this is of course a fairly busy week for us, I know, is your final formal paper number 2. This will have a cover sheet. It will be different from the other packet. This will either be Chapter 4 or Chapter 5. And again, you are required to follow the MLA style book for this paper with 5 pieces of external validation. Now again, just to remind, This is a paper of exposition. Okay, it is not the argument paper. That one is coming. So make sure that you do not hand in for paper number 2 a piece of argumentation. Okay, even if it's done well, I will have to score it down because it specifically is not expository. So you want to make sure it's a piece of exposition. Okay, go back and look at your notes on exposition if you need any clarification as to what we're talking about in regards to exposition versus argumentation. So 5 pieces of external validation, following the MLA style book, etc., etc. The most important thing I can say about that is a segue now into the lecture that I'm about to give, the mini tutorial I'm about to give, and that is the following. You want to think about the model on 772 to 778 as being what your paper needs to look like as you present it to me next Thursday, okay, the day after tomorrow, okay? So you've got 2 papers that you'll be submitting to me on Thursday that both are going to follow this MLA style book to some degree, all right? Well, not to some degree, assiduously. That is to say, you want to try and do the best job you can following the MLA style book. I'm now ready to give a brief introductory lecture on style book and citation method. I recommend that you have out your hymnal, Axelrod Cooper. I recommend that you have it open to 772. I recommend that you also have your book at 778. I recommend that you have a blank sheet of paper in front of you for some note-taking. And now we'll kind of walk through this process. When I talk about style book, it always to me makes sense that we provide the proper rationale first. So it makes sense to you as a student writing a paper. Why in heaven's name does anyone care about this? I was just speaking with one of your colleagues who's in the University of Wyoming, where he received a letter grade of C for his class because in the final paper he misplaced 1 comma on the reference page of his essay. 1. The prof saw it as such an egregious act that he chastised the student both in class and through writing, and then jacked his score to the tune of a letter grade of C. Question: why could anyone care about levels of minutia like that? The answers are actually multi-leveled. Okay? One of the reasons why I'm sharing with you the instructor from the teaching company. He is the LeBron James of compositional theory, and he is. He lectures at Iowa Writers Workshop, which makes him one of the big shots. But the reason, other than the basic information he's providing you, is to just see for you, you can tell how much this cat cares about this stuff, right? He doesn't just care about it. He expects you to care about it that much. And if you don't care about it that much, it's not that something's wrong with him. He will see that as something's wrong with you. In other words, there is a certain understanding within the academic community that the rules of the game must be played really closely. But that's kind of a political answer. I think there's a better answer than that in regards to why people take this stuff so seriously. Let's talk about a paper that is written within the academic community. And now I'm going to go back and talk with you about something that all of you have been introduced to, something we will simply call the writing process. Okay, the writing process. But I'm going to amplify my observations to encompass writing within the academic community, which is a little bit different from writing at high school and writing for high school instructors. There are different kinds of understandings or expectations. How does this writing process then work? Okay, so let's start there. This writing, and now I'm going to backslash research, which within the academic community is symbiotic. It means the same thing. When we talk about writing, we're always talking about research. What did we call that in our last lecture? Consideration of what? The what? Historical what? Historical precedent. You'll recall. Now, for those of you who did not watch my lecture yet online at LearnStrong that I gave last time, hypercritical that you do so. You've got to hear that information to fit that information with the stuff that I'm about to say, because I'm not going to go into this, much detail, assuming you already know some of that stuff of last time. Okay? So this writing research process, and that's an important word, and I want you to circle or box that word. It is a process. And the way that we write these papers then is in some ways different from the way that we go about writing papers when we're not within the academic community, okay? Now I will step out of my professorial mode for a moment and say to you, look, dude, I am totally aware of the number of students at the university who do not follow this process inch by inch. That is to say, assiduously, a word that you've noticed I've now used already 3 times in this lecture, okay? By the book, by the numbers. What I would say is this: if you learn how to do it, you can learn how to shortcut it. Do you understand what I just said? You can figure out ways to shortcut it. We are playing a game. There is no doubt about that. And I certainly teach it as a game, even though my colleagues get kind of hostile about that fact. It is a game. It's not as important as lots of people want to make it out to be. But I will say it's important enough for you to know how to do it well enough so that if you get with some kind of Nazi composition person who wants you to follow every one of the rules exactly, you can kind of get a sense by those kinds of people early on, and so you do follow this process to the nth degree. If you are with someone who's a little bit more laid back, and you know, one of the keys early on, let's say you're in a biology class and the instructor says, we're going to have a term paper 5 weeks out, I want you to pick a topic in biology and write about it. If no mention is made of style book, then it probably makes sense for you to ask, so what kind of style book do you want us to write with? And if the prof says something like, I really don't care, just pick one, it doesn't matter to me. That tells you something about the instructor. As opposed to, we are in the sciences, we follow the APA style book, please do not deviate. I do not want the MLA style book in our paper. Now all of a sudden you're dealing with a totally different specimen of a prof. That means this person's going to get out a ruler to measure margins, is going to study closely your reference page to see that it's followed correctly. And I've already given you an example as a classic case text that if you don't do it well, some profs will in fact see that as a lack of due diligence. Some will even see it as kind of personal insult or whatever. And I've even heard of profs who just look at the reference page, and if one thing's wrong, they just failed the whole paper and just send it back to the student. Don't even read the paper. Why would I look at your paper if your citation is not correct, was the response given by the prof. I would say, as young students, now just entering the academic community, instead of being troubled by this fact and even angered by it, I would say, or even seeing it as just what it really probably is, silliness, right, in every way, I would say grow to understand the importance within the academic community of playing by the rules early on. So for example, if you call the instructor Dr. Robinson and he corrects you, or if you call the instructor Mr. Robinson and he immediately challenges you, corrects you and says that's Dr. Robinson to you, don't see that as, oh, but rather see that as a game you have to play. So from this point on, every time you speak with Robinson, you're calling him Dr. Robinson, and that's the end of it. In other words, don't feel that somehow this is silly and you want to change that whole concept. Well, this doesn't make any sense to me, ergo. With that in mind, let's talk this process. The process, and I'm going to be very, very plebeian for a moment or two, simplify this process. The process normally, not always, normally begins with an assigned topic. Now, I have said for years, lecturing compositional theory, that one of the central problems with students is that they do not understand this simple thing I've just written on the board. If the instructor says, identify the 3 causes of the Civil War, and then further identify which of the 3 you consider to be most relevant, you must understand that is the assignment. Okay? In other words, you can't just write a paper where you write about 1 cause of the Civil War, of the American Civil War. Nor can you just write about 3 causes of the American Civil War and then not take a position as to which of the 3 matters the most in your estimation. You have to know the topic right away. Understanding what you are being asked to write on is, I would say, 80% of completion of the process. And it has to be thorough for you. You really have to know what are the specifics and what are the assignment expectations. For example, and this is huge if you're going to study in a humanities honors program. For example, I'll give you a classic example. Dr. Harris at the honors program in the University of Wyoming. He will often give assignments in that honors program, but he will stipulate absolutely no citation in your papers of any kind. He says, I don't want it, I don't want to read it, I don't even want you to consult any kind of source work. I want you to tell me what you think of the literature. I'm not interested in what scholars have to say about the literature. And if I sniff out that you're actually just citing other things, or you're trying to rewrite or paraphrase, I'm going to jack your papers. I want to know what you think about the literature. I do not care what other people think. I already know what they think. I want to know what you think. Well, whoa. Dude, if that's the case and you have to write on Dante's Inferno in an honors class, then you have to know that right away. I'm writing on my own kind of view, interpretation of the text, as opposed to the instructor who says, I want you to comb through the literature, the multiple variant ways that Dante's Inferno is read, from the Renaissance to the postmodern reader. Now that's a different project. Now all of a sudden you're doing a different kind of reading project because you're doing research. So knowing the assigned topic and the expectations is crucial. Part of these expectations has to do with this issue of style book. Okay? And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Style book. Now, what do we mean when we talk about a style book? Well, papers are constructed, if I can do this with boxes, sometimes students say it's the easiest way because it's a mnemonic for them. Papers are constructed with two parts. There's what we will call in-text work, okay? And then there's what we will call end-text work. Okay? I'm playing a little game here with these two words. Often this term is referenced as the word references, or sometimes works, and now an important word, cited. And that's a key word for us, okay? When that word gets used, citation, we are talking about research, okay? What I will often reference as external or internal validation, all right? Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, follow my little board here. First of all, the topic is given, which leads to a process of writing that we've kind of already talked about. That lecture on jam writing is sometimes a useful first step, etc., etc. Somewhere along the way, though, you actually got to sit down and you got to actually start putting words on the page. You got to actually type something up. That process is of two kinds. First of all, there's going to be your words, right? The stuff you say, okay? And then there's going to be what I'll just simply call their words, okay? Now, it's their words that we are speaking of now. In the body of the paper, when you are writing with required validation, that is what we will call external, coming from some outside source other than yourself, okay? You have to be able to provide the basic information to the reader, / the prof, that allows for the prof to know where you got your information from. All right? Now, let's talk about that P word for just a second. What word am I talking about? The famous P word. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? What do I mean when I use the P word? The borrowing of other people's ideas and calling it your own is called what? Do we know? It is plagiarism. Now, one of the monumental differences between high school writing and university academic community writing is this P word. When we provide in text anything, underline the word, star the word, circle the word, anything that is not of our own creation, we must, and I'm going to use an academic phrase, provide proper attribution. Now, what does that mean? Well, that word attribution comes from our word attribute. To attribute means to provide the source. Okay? The proper attribution is necessary, or the paper immediately is assumed to be plagiarized in some or all. A single violation of plagiarism fails the paper. Okay? This has now become a major deal on university campuses. I mean, I just was with some university people at a meeting and we were talking about this, and this was their major complaint about high school students. They think writing papers is cutting and pasting. They go online, they find this from this source, this from that source, they cut, they paste, they put together a paper, they hit a print key, they hand it in. Coming to the university, then for high school students, can be a major culture shock. And I do mean major. Here's why. Everything that you are saying in your paper is directly responsible to you. You are the one responsible. It is your paper. Your name is associated with this product. To that degree, there is a moral or ethical component that university people get really fired up about. Now, there's dark irony in all of this. You can go to the university and engage in all kinds of unethical, immoral behavior that profs could care less about. But the minute that you quote someone else and don't provide proper attribution, it becomes a major moral act, immoral act, right? An ethical, invalidated act. And therefore, all kinds of action can be brought against you, definitely legal action even. Well, how do we keep ourselves from messing with this and worrying about this? It's pretty simple. In text, we are going to be working with one of two kinds of validation, okay? We're either going to be giving direct or indirect. Let's start with indirect. Indirect or direct kinds of attribution. Okay. If we're talking indirect attribution, we're talking about either summarizing or paraphrasing information from a source. All right? In other words, this is definitely not our stuff. It's definitely somebody else's ideas. But we do not provide it word for word. Okay? When we are providing intel word for word, we will call that a direct, right? A direct quote. A direct reference, and therefore we are obliged to put quotation marks there, okay, around that information. Okay? No quotation marks if we do not word for word quote. If we summarize, if we just kind of make reference to, if we paraphrase, all of that is what we would constitute as an indirect form of citation. Okay? But a direct form of citation is a word-for-word quote, and therefore quotation marks required. Now, once that is done, within the body of the paper itself, follow closely, you have to provide enough information so that the reader could go and find the very quote, direct or indirect, wherever that is. I'll say that again because what I just said explains everything about why the citation method is so important. Whatever you do, whatever you say, and are you ready for this? Whatever style book you use, the fundamental idea is simple. If you go outside of yourself to find information, if you bring that information either directly or indirectly into your paper, you have to provide the reader with enough information so that the reader can go and find that exact information himself or herself. Okay? You have to provide enough information. What does that mean? Well, you have to first of all start with the author's name. Okay? Whoever said it has a name. Are you ready for this? If whoever said it doesn't have a name, don't say it. In the age of electronic technology, it is so unbelievably simple to create a website. I mean, a classic example of this was an Ivy League school. They hate that we tell this story, but it's true. Where a guy was in college, but he wasn't going to classes because he was making thousands of dollars by creating websites where he was posting information so students could quote it in their papers. So for example, dude, I'm writing a paper in zoology. I needed to say this. Can you create a source? No worries. He would sit down, create the website, create the source, post it to somewhere on the web so that the kid could then quote that completely fallacious, totally made up information in his paper, so he didn't have to do any research. All he had to say is, I need these things to be able, I got to be able to say these things in my paper. Can you just make up a document? This kid was so gifted at this that he could just write real quickly like a document. He would just post it to the website. The kid could do it. And then of course, he had a credit card account, so the minute that he got the money from a student, he would upload to the net so that they could quote. He had been doing this for a couple of years and making serious money. As in, he said, I didn't need to get a degree in business. I was already making money. Why would I need a degree in business? Well, it's stories like that that now have made it more incumbent, and the trickle-down effect, of course, affects people like him, right? So that now it's really important that you understand, if you are providing any information that does not have an author's name, you better have a really clear understanding of why not. Now, when you're citing from specifically organizations that are well known and recognized, NASA always is the classic example, you are allowed to be able to cite from a source like that without having an actual author's name, but you got to be very careful. You got to be very careful. A lot of profs will say, I know NASA says it, but who are the academics who put the information on the NASA site? Run that source down. That source has a name. I want to know that name. Don't give me the NASA website. I want to know specifically the author's name, so that way we can know specifically this information is legit. What makes it legit within the academic community? Go back to that lecture on the academic community. Do you remember that lecture? Do you remember how we started working down the whiteboard? Do you remember that we said you can get an AA degree, 2-year degree? Then remember we said you can get a BA or a BS degree, 4-year degree. Then we said you could get a master's degree, MA degree, master's degree, right, MA, MS. And then we said after that, you can get what we call the PhD or the doctorate degree. What constitutes a legit source within the academic community? Nothing written by anybody other than, most of the time, people with those terminal degrees of PhD. Do you got me? It's even sometimes iffy to cite from a master's thesis. You got to be very careful. There will be profs who will say, the only people who I want you citing are experts in the field qualified with terminal degree. What does terminal degree mean? The last degree you can get within the field, which for most fields is the PhD. Not all. An MFA actually qualifies in some fields in the humanities, the Master of Fine Arts, as a terminal degree. And once that's held, that's kind of the end, the terminal degree. But PhDs are what we're talking about most of the time. So one of the challenges for you is to know how to find that information. Suggestion, you ain't going to find it on the open Google. You're not. Now, if you research in Google Scholar, you will often be able to find experts within the field. But this is why databases are so important, and especially academic databases. There are people who are paid megabucks to sit in front of a computer all day long and glean information that then gets uploaded to those databases. That's all they do. In other words, it goes through a process of checking and double-checking the academic work. That's why your profs will never let you quote from Wikipedia. Wikipedia is an outstanding first site for research, but you will never cite from Wikipedia. Why? Because there is not the kind of scrutiny that is applied to Wikipedia that will be applied, for example, to the Britannica. So the online Britannica, you can easily cite from. Why? Because there's a whole group of people who are paid megabucks to go through every citation reference and to make sure it's, for lack of a better term, legitimate. Got me? So it's really important how you're doing your research, but once you've got your research, you've got to be able to present it. In-text citation, in most style books, requires predominantly an author's name. Now, if you go to that packet that I gave to you on citation, I believe I got a 2-page paper, and this big, I gave you this just a second ago. I believe I've got a 2-page paper somewhere in there that suggests how specifically you want to be citing in terms of the MLA style book, both for in-text and for works cited page. Okay? And that information, it should be, somebody find a page number so you know what I'm talking about. Yep, that's the one, page 6. Page 6, page 7. Is it a 2-page gig? Did I say that right? Page 6, page 7. Now, I recommend that you put a little star on this page, or maybe on that cover page on the first of it, to say, yeah, you really want to pay attention to this page. Here's why. I've reduced a lot of the information from the MLA style book specific to that page for the kinds of citation that are most important. First of all, let's talk about in-text citation in regards to the author's name. All right? There's 2 ways this happens. 1, the author's name is included in the sentence itself. Let's say that you're writing a paper on, the arguable thesis is, the moon is made of cheese. And your topic then, the moon is made of cheese, requires external validation. That's part of the assigned topic. You've got to go find somebody else who thinks the moon is made of cheese. So onto the internet you go, and you find a person of credibility who will argue, let's just say his name is Dr. Robinson. Dr. Robinson argues the moon is made of cheese. There are 2 ways to present that information. 1, you can simply use it as an indirect summary, where you would say, Dr. Robinson suggests that the moon is made of cheese. Okay? Or you can use Dr. Robinson's name not at all in the sentence, in an indirect fashion. The moon is made of cheese, it has been suggested by scholars. But then after that observation, it's a summary, it's an indirect quote, in parentheses you will provide the author's last name. And you want to grow familiar with this notion of providing the author's last name. Okay, that is the way that we will reference in the body of the paper itself. An author's last name is usually enough for us. Of course, the other way is a direct quote, quote unquote, the moon is made of cheese, right? That's a direct quote. Okay. And again, there are 2 ways to present this in the body of the paper. 1 is to actually present the author's name in the sentence. Dr. Robinson has said, quote, the moon is made of cheese, end quote. Now, if you do that in the body of the paper with the name as part of the sentence, you are not obliged to have to provide any kind of parenthetics with Dr. Robinson's name afterwards. You've already provided the name in the actual sentence itself. On the other hand, if you quote, the moon is made of cheese, quotation marks, and you don't use Dr. Robinson's name in the sentence, you are obligated, after the quote, in parentheses, to provide the author's last name. Again, it's very simple. Think of it this way. If you provide anything that's not your own in the body of your paper, the instructor has got to have enough information from you to go and find that very quote. What? The moon is made of cheese? What kind of academic would say that? I want to go find that quote. Where do I find that quote? Well, first of all, I'm going to begin with the author's name. Secondly, I'm going to go to the works cited page. And that's normally what MLA will call this, works cited, sometimes called references, not a bibliography. What is the difference? A bibliography is a listing of any work consulted in the writing of a paper. Okay? It's back to our old middle school days when we had to write on the history of football, and all we had to do was to find one source, and then we could list 15 other sources that were books in the library on football. We never even looked at those sources, but it made us look like we had done some quote-unquote research. The MLA and the APA style book says, way wrong answer. The only thing that ever gets listed here is stuff that's actually cited in the body of the paper. Okay? So, for example, if you're doing a paper on the moon is made of cheese and you look at a lot of websites, but you don't actually ever cite from them, or from the databases, but you don't actually ever cite from them, but you did look at them and you read all of them, you don't get to list those on this page. The only thing you'll ever list on this page is stuff you've actually cited in the body of the paper. And then it's pretty simple from here. It's a relationship, it's symbiotic. In other words, if Robinson's name is quoted here, Robinson's name has got to appear here. Okay? Along with the full citation information on the works cited page. We will never, write it down and underline it, because your profs will jack you for it. We will never provide source work on the actual page itself in the text. You're never going to provide that URL. Okay? Especially, think of it this way, the URL, which when you cut and paste it into the body of the paper is initialized as blue, because of course that's what Microsoft does for us. So that, for example, you're reading in black ink and all of a sudden we come to a URL in blue. There's nothing that aggravates profs more than that. Okay, so you want to completely stay away from that project. All right? However, when you list it here on the Works Cited page, you're not just providing a URL, HTTP address. Way wrong answer. The very first thing, well, let's look at it now, 778. The very first thing out of your hymnal, it's also in your packet. I made a copy of it in your packet, so it's easy for you to see it. 778 is the last page of that model essay. And the thing you really want to pay attention to there, first and foremost, is form. Let's say a couple of things out loud. You want to write it down and notice it. Alphabetical order. Last name first. Do you see it? Okay, that's step one. All right. Secondly, in terms of basic formatting, please identify that each ensuing second line is indented of an entry, and then the next line goes justify left, okay, flush left. So that, are you looking at on 778? So that all of those names set out nice and clean. We are capable then of recognizing them immediately. Typically, we will always double space in text, right? You can single space your citations, but double space in between, right? From citation to citation, so that it's clean and easy to read. The idea is simple. Dude, if you're quoting Robinson here, your prof needs to be able to turn to the Works Cited page and find Robinson quickly, and then immediately, if want to, go to that information. Okay? So full citation information must be provided here. That varies depending upon whether it's a book, a magazine, or a periodical, some kind of database online information. Do you got me? Okay? So you have to know how to cite all of that. If you look now in your book to the information that you'll be looking at in more detail coming up, go ahead and look on 749 real quickly in Axelrod Cooper. And this is important. You want to point this out to yourself in your notes. You'll be looking at this in more detail coming up. But please identify the documentation styles. There's different words and they all mean the same thing. Documentation, attribution, citation, validation, all of those terms mean the same thing. When you're writing academic papers, you have to have some kind of research, and you're going to cite that stuff both in text as well as at the end. Those different kinds are listed for you here. And this is an evolving process, I should point out. So, for example, some students have been using the superscript, subscript of Microsoft because it's very simple for them to just provide the citation referencing information right at the bottom of the page. What used to be termed footnoting at the bottom of the page. Some people really like it. Let's just point out, profs don't very often. They don't like it. What they like is this style book that allows for almost nothing to appear on the in-text page other than your words and then researched words that you're citing, and then a reference page to follow. But you've got a list there. Notice by subject area the kinds of citation that are most popular. Also notice the websites. Very useful. There are online resources for any style book. So I say this to you because let's just say you're in a chemistry class. Are you looking with me on 749? Let's just say you're in a chemistry class and the prof says, you got a paper for me in 4 weeks, follow the ACS style guide, go. You do not, whatever you do, raise your hand and say, what's an ACS style guide? Whoa. I mean, you might as well just pull out the bat now, hand it to him so he can just punch you in the face with it and give you your C for the class. No. But you can easily Google the ACS style book and it will immediately take you to the website. The reason I'm pointing this out, even for MLA, is that things are constantly changing. One of the things I want you to do right away, tonight, tomorrow morning, is to sit down and Google the MLA style book homepage. Take a look at it. But in terms of generalities, if you flip the page now to 750, There it is. The MLA system of documentation beginning with citations is in text. Do you see it on 750? And then, you know, you can kind of see that when you're citing from different places, etc., etc. And then do you see on 753 the list of works cited? And they literally will take you through. If you do anything, make sure you read this several times closely to understand where specifically, do you see it on 754? Where specifically all the information goes. Now for a word on Noodle Tools. Noodle Tools is an attempt, among many, to try to give you a fast shortcut to citation referencing, especially on a works cited page. And I think most of you have been introduced to Noodle Tools and have used it. I should point out, though, that sometimes these kinds of softwares are not always keeping up with the most up-to-date rules in regards to style books. So you got to be careful about this. Okay, by the way, this is what happened to my student. He just used Noodle Tools, and what do you know, the prof was looking for how closely this kind of thing was being followed so he could check scores. Okay. Just to finish my comments here, if you want to keep turning real quickly, 758 is a crucial page for you and the ones to follow, because so much of what you're doing now is electronic sources. There was a day, are you ready for this? There was a day when if you had to write on the 3 causes of the American Civil War, you had to walk to a library, go in the door, walk up or downstairs usually into the stacks. You had to go to a little room where there were these wooden carrels that you pulled out a long, narrow little drawer. Inside of the drawer there were these little cards that every one had been typed on by a librarian, placed in alphabetical order, and you had to flip through all of these cards to start looking to find your research. You then had to write down the number off the card, go to the library stack, find the book, hope that it hadn't been checked out, find the book, sit down, read chapter after chapter of the book to find your one quote that you then would cite. To teach this process, no kidding, instructors would make students fill out index cards. I'm not making this up. Index cards. They literally made students fill out index card information, where on one side you put the citation information, on the back side you put the actual information you were taking out of the book. I kid you not. You actually had to make index cards. This is old school. If you find any instructor who makes you do this kind of thing, that's because in his or her time, that was the way you did research. You literally did it. Now about that I would say the following. Doing that is a great, great history project. It is, because it teaches you the way it used to be done. I've often said if an instructor is going to demand that, an instructor should also demand those little hunt and peck typewriters where you ding, and then you had to do your little arm thingy, like that, okay, before they even had delete tape, so that you could go through the whole historical process of finding out what it really was like. It was living hell. I will tell you this. It was living hell. To write a 10-page research paper then required hundreds of hours sometimes of research, depending on where you were working at the undergraduate, the master's, or the PhD level, okay? Today, totally different. A Stanford University student sits in her dorm room, has full access to every single holding in that library. Every single page, every single word has all been digitized. All of it. And it is all a function now of search engines as well. So if I'm writing, for example, on the 3 causes of the American Civil War, I can immediately access billions of pieces of information within a nanosecond of time, and it's all listed for me, oftentimes listed for me in different ways, depending on how I want it. Most recent published, most academic oriented, blah, blah, blah. So it makes research a completely different project, which is why 758 is an important page for you. If you're working with databases and you're working with online materials, which of course is the majority of what we're doing now, then it makes a whole lot of sense to know specifically how to play that game. To finish now this part of the project, if you'll look over on 763, even though we don't use the APA style book in the humanities departments of the universities and the colleges in the state of Wyoming, and most universities and colleges do not require humanities students to use the APA style book, the American Psychological Association style book. I still think it makes a lot of sense for you to know it and to look at it. I've done this in years past where you had to come in with 5 at least differences between the 2 style books and you had to comb through to figure it out. I've stopped doing it because guess what? You can Google that and get it in 20 seconds. 5 differences between, pretty much any of those old school ways to see if you knew stuff. You can now get all of the information really fast through online sources and the like. But what I would say is this. It makes some sense to at least be familiar with what the APA style book does in regards to the MLA style book. Going online and just Googling this question, what is the difference between the 2 style books, can you kind of explain it to me? You can easily find really fast information that'll help you to understand that. Why? Because if you're in the academic community for long, you will have a prof that will say, I do not want the MLA style book, I want the APA style book. By the way, that even happens within the humanities. There are English profs who will tell you, I don't want the MLA style book, I want the APA style book. A lot of them are people like myself who came out of another discipline other than the humanities. So for example, they got a degree, many of their degrees maybe come out of the psych background or the sociology background. And so because that's the case, they're more familiar with the APA style. Makes sense. Okay? Questions, comments, observations, concerns. In the end then, when you have your paper, this is important, your works cited page is a page unto itself. Let's just talk basic formatting for a second. Works cited page is a page unto itself, okay? If you have an instructor that requires a cover sheet, you got a cover sheet. You then will follow with, on page 1, some information up here in the top corner that's going to designate who and what this paper is all about. Okay? Look at 772. I think it's all right there for you. Okay? So just look right there at that paper and you can see. Do they put it at the top left or the top right, by the way? Do they put it here? Right? Okay? Yeah. Whatever that textbook suggests, I'd recommend that you just learn how to do it that way. Although you can go online and take a look at the MLA style book just to see if it's changed since then. Okay. Then you're going to have your titles. Then you're going to have your actual essay itself. Within the body of the paper, you're obviously providing proper attribution and source work. And then you've got a works cited page. All of that is either stapled, paper clipped, or none of the above, depending on your prof. No kidding. Some profs they do not want, if you staple it, you're going to lose points. No kidding. Why is